Sure.
We want to wait for
a bit slower.
Huh?
For the second one, it's really important.
Yeah, okay. No,
but we can start with
have
this.
it for sure. Interesting. Is the hearing? Maybe the no, it's not here for sure. So. Sometimes they get lost. We start and then we figure out. Okay, so welcome everybody. This is the second day at the Policy Summer School. I hope you're enjoying. I hope you didn't get too wet last night. I don't know if someone forgot it. I was outside. It was kind of. So today we have another great day. We have two great professors speaking to us. We will spend the morning with Şener and the afternoon with Andrea Garbage. So as yesterday, we were going to have the break at 11. But since we are with Şener, he will tell us when is a good time. Yeah, the break is not the break is at 10:30. You have the break at 10:30, but with Şener, he will tell us how the dynamic might be slightly different because we have two lectures in a row. He will tell us how to organize. So let me introduce Şener Aktürk, who is a professor in the Department of International Relations at Koç University. He's a scholar of comparative politics with a focus on comparative politics of ethnicity, religion, and nationalism. After he has done his BA and MA at the University of Chicago, then his PhD at the University of California, Berkeley, and he was a postdoctoral fellow at the Davis Center for Russian and Eurasian Studies and a visiting lecturer at the Department of Government at Harvard University. His book, Regimes of Ethnicity and Nationhood in Germany, Russia, and Turkey, received the 2013 Joseph Rothschild Book Prize. It was published by Cambridge University Press in 2012. In his comparative studies, they look at several countries in this publication, going from Afghanistan, Algeria, Austria, Belgium, Bulgaria, Egypt, France, Germany, Greece, Iran, the Netherlands, North Macedonia, Mexico, Russia, and the United States. Basically, they have questions on most of the world we can ask to Şener because we study all these countries. This article was published in relevant academic journals on world politics, perspective on politics, comparative politics, Journal of Ethnic and Immigration Studies, post-Soviet affairs, Mediterranean politics, and way a lot of what is really important, Turkish policy, Portuguese reception, and various edited books. He is the recipient of the Peter Odegaard Award, the Marie Curie International Reintegration Grant, the Baki Konsooglu Social Science International Award, the Cadet Arts Social Science Prize, Tuba Young Scientist Award, EAGP Science Academic Award, and the Tubitak Incentive Prize. So it's a great honor for me to give the word to Şener for his lecture. So he has two lectures. He went to the first one entitled Regimes of Ethnicity and Nationhood, Typology of State Policy and Alternative Ethnic Regime Change, and later Regime of Ethnicity and Securitization Challenge, Empirical Insight from Germany, Turkey, and Russia. Thanks, Şener.
Thank you very much, Andrea. I hope everyone is able to hear me because I'm now using the microphone. I'll be at the podium at least for the first lecture until we get the clicker for the second one. And I should say that the first one is more foundational. So the lectures are cumulative. So we'll talk about the theory, the typology, its applications, consequences, and origins all in the first lecture. And then the second lecture, as you see in the schedule, is just the application of these concepts and theories to the cases of Germany, Turkey and Russia in half-hour segments. So both of the lectures are divided into uneven three parts. As you will see, I am, by the way, very happy to be with such an engaged audience, interested in securitization of ethnic minorities, migrants, and nationalism. So it's a great honor to be in Bolzano, South Tyrol, which is also a region of theoretical interest, of course, for someone who studies governance of ethnic and linguistic diversity. Of course, I don't want to go over time, and it's already 9:10, so let's try to go over the roadmap of the entire lecture, which we should be able to finish in 80 minutes, hopefully, to make it to the coffee break. If we can't, then we are going to leave some of it to the second lecture. So this is the roadmap. It's a performance, as all, although I don't know if I can follow up on the excellent performances of yesterday. There is not much multimedia or visuals, I have to warn you. But this lecture unfolds in 3 acts with a prologue. The prologue is definitions. Some of them will be repetitions and revisions of the definitions you heard yesterday. So it's cumulative also in that sense. I've closely watched the 3 lectures yesterday, so some of them will be repetitions but also revisions. And then the 3 major parts of the lecture. The first part is by far the largest. What are the 3 regimes of ethnicity? This is the typology that Andre also mentioned, that I laid out in my book, Regimes of Ethnicity, but also in the 50-page article that is the first assignment in the first reading in your syllabus. So for those of you who've read it, it will be an exposition of that, followed by the measurement of 3 regimes of ethnicity. How do we know if a country is monoethnic, multi-ethnic, or anti-ethnic? And an example, and a curious example for the occasion where we are. And then the second, much shorter part will be what are the causes of an ethnic regime change. This is the theory of ethnic regime change that is also included in the same book, and which will be applied in the second lecture to the cases of Germany, Turkey, and Russia. And finally, the shortest segment will be what may be the origins of the 3 regimes of ethnicity and their consequences. So both historical origins going back maybe centuries, but also consequences in the present day in 2020, 2021, 2012. Okay, so, and all of these are following the reading list for this lecture, the first reading being the primary, and the second one about origins, the third one with Yuri Katliaru on the consequences, the current present-day consequences of 3 ethnicity regimes, Maya Tudor and Harris Milanas's overview of different typologies of nationhood, ethnicity, governance of ethnicity, and Volodymyr Kulik's application of some of these concepts in the case of Ukraine in the very recent 2022 issue of Slavic Review, Is Ukraine a Multi-Ethnic Country? But the overwhelming focus will be on the first reading. So the prologue. Is it working? I don't think it's working. Oh, okay, so now it's working. Okay, prologue, definitions. Oops. Okay, so went too far. Okay, so every individual has multiple identities, so I want to mention this because our overwhelming focus is ethnicity and nationalism, and we'll talk about why those are usually presented together. But there is no reason to assume that ethnic identity is the primary identity for any individual, and many individuals at present, highly urbanized people might not even have ethnic identities. We might say many people are post-ethnic or non-ethnic in that sense. Every individual often has geographic, linguistic, religious, sexual, ideological, partisan, occupational, professional, national, regional, and other identities. And it is obvious to me, but I want to also communicate that obviously for many individuals, different identities will be the primary identities driving their behavior, electoral behavior, political behavior, lifestyle, and so on and so forth. So there is no reason to assume that ethnicity will be the primary identity for any individual, let alone majority of individuals. That being said, we have many courses on ethnicity and nationalism, and many lectures and networks and projects on ethnicity and nationalism for a reason, and I'll get to that, and that's why we have this prologue. But first, on definitions of ethnicity, and I use a very peculiar one, which is more or less the most popular one, at least in political science. Ethnicity has many definitions, but what do you think is the distinctive quality of ethnic identity that distinguishes it from all other social identities, such as the ones I listed above, and there are many others, right? I mean, what is it about ethnicity and ethnic belonging that is distinctive, different from religious, sexual, linguistic, geographic, national? Because if it's the same thing with any of them, we wouldn't need a separate word for ethnicity, right? So there has to be something distinctive, distinguishing from all other identities, so we use ethnicity. Any guesses at 5 minutes into the lecture, maybe? People are still waking up, but can you think of any quality that any ethnic group is said to have, even if it doesn't have any of these other qualities, language, religion, etc.? Sure.
It's perceived as something more fixed, arts.
Fixed, okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, less changeable.
Immutable, definitely. Something more immutable, inane, inborn, right? Innate, right? Okay. Thank you. And what was your name? Gaetano, yes. And Raika. Common history. Okay. Thank you, Raika. Common history. Okay. Any others? That's a long side. Yes.
No, I'm just.
You are just thinking. Okay. Okay. I mean, obviously there are many different definitions, but I use Max Weber's definition, as in many other concepts, because I do think it highlights what is distinctive about ethnicity in the absence of any other social category, and it is immutable, ineffable. Max Weber says ethnicity is the social identity that relies on a subjective belief in common descent, belief in blood kinship, which is fixed, immutable, but it is the belief, right? So we, as social scientists, we understand that there might be nothing objective or provable about it, but it's the belief that these people are related by blood, even if they don't share a religion or geography or language or anything else, right? Of course, ethnicity might overlap with religion or with language, with both, with geography, with nationality. It might, but it doesn't have to be. I'll give you several examples. My first driving instructor, when I returned to Turkey after 11 years from the US, surprisingly, I didn't drive in the United States, which is quite shocking, right? How can you not drive in the US for 11 years? So my first driving teacher in Turkey was a Georgian, right, from Tbilisi. Not from Tbilisi, but he said, I'm Georgian. He doesn't speak Georgian. He definitely doesn't have any affinity with the Jew. He's Muslim, right? And then he said, my wife is also Georgian. I mean, how come? They've never been to Georgia, but there is this, they don't speak the Georgian language. They are mainstream Sunni Muslims. They have never been to post-Soviet Republic of Georgia or to Batumi, Ajaria, where Muslim Georgians were majority until the 19th century, and they were forced to emigrate to the Ottoman Empire, but they still have the subjective, fictive belief that they are bloodkins as Georgians. So, and this is the same with many ethnic groups that have completely lost their language and that don't have a different religion, right? It could be many of the Scots, some of the Welsh, many ethnic groups that don't have a distinctive language, like the Druze, Maronites, you know, these all Arabic-speaking Middle Eastern ethnic groups that nonetheless have a subjective belief that they are bloodkins, and so on and so forth. So I don't want to dwell too much on it. This was supposed to be just one slide. And I'm going to continue with Max Weber's definition of the nation, and then I'm going to ask about the linkage. Max Weber says, a nation is a community of sentiment which would adequately manifest itself in a state of its own. I actually don't know if it's better to do this, because I don't mind. Since millions of people will watch the most popular lecture on ethnicity and nationalism in the 21st century. No, I mean, I'm telling you what will happen. A nation is a community of sentiment which would adequately manifest itself in a state of its own. Hence, a nation is a community which normally tends to produce a state of its own. It doesn't mean it's a community that has a state. It's the tendency or the aspiration to have one. Remember that Anderson also defines the nation as an imagined political community and imagined as both inherently limited and sovereign, and we'll get back to the limited part. Here, sovereign is more important. So we could combine these two, and they very much complement each other, and say nation is a collectivity with a belief in their right to political control over a particular territory, which may be in support of an existing state, right? France, Italy, Germany, or aspiring to establish a new state, Quebecois, Scottish, Catalan, and so on and so forth. So it could be an aspiration to establish a state, or at least territorial autonomy. So the key here is collective belief in territorial self-government. Because there are many ethnic groups that don't have this kind of nationalist aspiration, very obviously. I mean, there are hundreds of them. So we can't say that every ethnic group, Norwegian Americans, I mean, they don't have a different electoral behavior, they don't have an aspiration for self-government there. So majority of ethnic groups don't, but some of them might overlap. And what is important, though, is that this belief in a collective right to territorial control by the population from bottom up is a historically very new phenomenon. And that's what social constructivist and modernist theories of nationalism convincingly argued, right? It's so new in the human history that even if we go to the very origins of modern nationalism, which is Western Europe, around here, actually slightly further west, I'd say, right? Maybe France, England, maybe Portugal, Spain. Though Dutch, these are arguably the earliest nation states. We can quibble whether Dutch were the first, the English, or the Portuguese, but it's one of them, right? But even in this geography, let alone outside of Western Europe, if we asked ordinary Hans, I'm sorry I picked a kind of very common male name, in Bavaria, in the year 1500, who are you, Hans? What would Hans say? This is actually Dutch painting. It's not from Bayern, but let's assume that this is Bavaria. What would Hans say in the year 1500 to a question, who are you? Eylül?
Maybe about, it could be an answer about their social status, like a peasant or...
I'm a peasant, okay. And 90+% of the people will be, so it's the most common answer. You could say I'm a peasant. What else could Hans say in the year 1500?
What is religious?
What is it?
I'm guessing Protestants.
No, in 1500 it will almost certainly be with 99.9% certainty Christian, Catholic, Roman Catholic, right? Because Martin Luther didn't post the thesis in Wittenberg. That's going to be 15, 16 years later. Roman Catholicism has a religious monopoly in almost all of Western Europe. So Hans would say, I'm Christian. Of course, he won't say Catholic because the only true form of Christianity is Catholicism at that point in time, from that point of view. So Hans would say, I'm Christian, I'm peasant. What else could Hans say? The identities that matter for him. The identities that he has at that point in time in 1500. Sorry, I can't... his gender. Yeah, I could say I'm a man, but I mean, you know, at that time probably sexual and gender identities overlap even more. Okay, thank you. And what was your name? Could you just mention your names as you speak? Yes. Shincha. Thank you for everyone.
Monarchy?
Monarchy, what do you mean? What would?
Feudalist system?
So he would say, I'm the subject of, you know, König of Bavaria, the king of Bavaria, someone. Okay. So I'm a subject of the Bavarian king. He could probably say, I'm going to accelerate it a bit, that he's working as a peasant because he's a landless peasant, right? It's feudalism, that he's subject to you know, Freiherr von Braunstein or something. So he could say what no one said, that he's the son of Johannes, or, you know, whatever is his familiar lineage. His village, Bayerhof village, all of these are imaginary peasant working for a Freiherr something, subject of King of Bavaria, Christian, Roman Catholic, and Hans is illiterate, right? Overwhelming majority of the people are illiterate, and the liturgy is in Latin, of course. So what he can't say in 1500 is, I'm German. His language might be related, but also very different from the language spoken by people in Hamburg or Vienna or Bern at the time, so they probably can't understand each other. The radical change in the answer of Hans in just a few centuries is dramatic, because Hans in 1950 almost certainly will say, I'm German. Now he's working in a BMW factory in the Federal Republic of Germany. He's a non-observant but still nominal Catholic, it's Bavaria, and he's literate almost for sure, right, German in 1950, but only in Hochdeutsch, the standard High German. So the question is, why, when, and how did his answer changed so radically, and this change happened even more recently in non-Western Europe, right? In the Czech lands, in the Ottoman Empire, in, you know, South Asia, Southeast Asia. We could have the same experiment, not with 1500, even 1900, and we still won't have people identifying as Thai and, you know, Burmese and Persian and Turkish and so on and so forth. So that was the prologue, and this is the investigation we are launching, which we probably won't get through. So Act 1, what is the relationship between ethnicity and nationality? Why are scholars often discussing ethnicity and nationalism as related? What links national identity to ethnicity, you think? Eylül?
I think we talked about this yesterday too, so inspired by that. Some ethnicities can become, like, aspire to be nations, so that could be a relation.
Sure.
Yeah, and nationalism is also related to national identity and.
Thank you. What else? Thank you, Eylül. And Gaetano?
Historiography, like the belief in common descent justifies the national feeling.
Okay, okay. So, okay, great. These are both bottom-up approaches. Also, I'm urging you to look from the state's point of view. Basically, how do you, I have to carry this with me all the time, right? I'm in a foreign country. So what links the crescent and the star to give me this? And not the Bundesrepublik or the Jewish state or the French Republic. From the state's point of view, how might ethnicity and nationality, the granting of membership, might be linked? Maybe that wasn't what you were going to say, but I'll still call on you. Andrew.
He was going to say about historiography and narratives, how to state like national biographies, but maybe you were about religion. Also, like in the case of the Jewish, it's quite clear.
Yes, ethnicity might overlap with religion, and in the case of Jewish ethno-religious identity, this is very clear. And if that also turns into a nation state, then there is a link between not just ethnicity, but ethnicity, religion, and nationality. Yes, thank you, Andre. And one other link, of course, is language, because having an official language, which every modern state had to have, may imply a core ethnic group of the nation, right? Once you pick Parisian French, that means it's not the language, I mean, the language of the state is not Occitan, not Breton, not Catalan or Arabic, it is the language of one group, right? If you pick Persian as the official language, that means 50% of Iran that is Persian speaking, that's their official language and not Azerbaijani, Turkish or Kurdish or Turkmen or Baluch or any other ethnic group. So one immediate linkage is through language, and official language and near universal literacy are essential features of modern life. Another important linkage is census and identification documents. Some states that have ethnicity in their censuses, many states actually, and then many others even in individual ID cards. Soviet Union, South Africa, apartheid South Africa, Israel, etc. It may be a religion, as Andre mentioned. If a religion is also an ethnicity, and if a nation is equated with that religion, that may imply an ethnic group in the nation. And in fact, an example I gave here were Jewish and Armenian. So that's another linkage. Which brings me to the topic of today's presentation more fully, regime of ethnicity. Regime of ethnicity is what I describe are the state policies and institutions that regulate the relationship between ethnicity and nationality. In order to move and use the clicker, I have to get away from the microphone, and it's very, I have to walk a little bit. So there is a plethora of policies that regulate the relationship between ethnic membership and citizenship and its expression. And this is the ethnicity regime. These policies are not randomly distributed. I mean, you have the list of policies in the article, and I'll also show them here. And one example, they are not randomly distributed. There's 8, 9, depending on how you subdivide them, even more policies. They are not randomly distributed. They coalesce around 3 major groups, which I call as the 3 ethnicity regimes in the next slide and in the article. This is why I define them as a regime, because if they were randomly distributed, without any logic, it would just be a random distribution of state policies on this area. But it's not a random distribution, and you'll see them in specific cases, especially of Germany as one regime type, Russia as a separate regime type, Turkey, France, Italy to a certain extent as another regime type. And those are the 3 regime types. What are those? What are those? No, I think the clicker is conspiring against me. So first, the deductive test. This is the conceptualization stage in methodology, right? The next stage is measurement. At an abstract level, there are 2 major dimensions in which ethnicity might be related to nationality, national membership. First is the very point of entry, membership. If the state deliberately, legally limits the acquisition of membership, which is citizenship, to one ethnic category only, then it's a monoethnic regime. And many countries in the world have privileged citizenship clauses for an ethnic group. Germany from 1913 until 1999, the Staatsangehörigkeitsgesetz. Israel, even today, any ethnic Jew in the world is a natural citizen if they immigrate. Estonia, Latvia, Finland has a special clause for Karelian Finns. Kazakhstan has a special clause for ethnic Kazakhs abroad, and so on and so on. From Finland and Poland down to Greece and Bulgaria, you have ethnic citizenship and immigration clauses. And in the German case, we'll see it very clearly in the next lecture, because it's the prototypical first example that can arguably spread to the rest of the world. But most of the countries in the world still aren't in this category. They grant citizenship to people from different ethnic categories. If they do, that is to say, if the state gives citizenship to the Germans and Italians and Brazilians and French and Sicilians, then the second question is very important. Does the state recognize, codify, institutionalize legally the ethnic diversity of its citizens? Does it have multiple official languages, federalism, ethnic groups in the constitution? If it does, it's a multi-ethnic regime. If it accepts many different ethnic groups as citizens, members, but prohibits the expression of their ethnic difference, imposes just one language, one culture, one ethnic group in legal documents, then it's an anti-ethnic regime trying to assimilate a diversity. Now, this is the conceptual, what I call the deductive test of membership and expression. Membership dimension is, of course, primary, but since most countries are not monoethnic, the second one is important. And here is the, it just won't work. Here is the second one. It doesn't work even from here. Okay. Okay. I'll just, okay. So this is the measurement, right? And in the article you'll see, especially in the book, I subdivide the fourth question into 3: constitution, census, ID separately, but it doesn't matter. So the first 3 questions, if a country has yes in the first 2, it's almost certainly a monoethnic country. Does the country have ethnic priority in citizenship? Does the country have ethnic priority in immigration, actively tries to bring co-ethnics from abroad to citizenship? Then if it's yes, then this is the state of ethnic Germans, ethnic Jews, ethnic, Hungarians, ethnic Poles, whatever. If it's no, then there are still 2 options between multi-ethnic and anti-ethnic, which means, they already give citizenship to many ethnic groups. Do they have multiple ethnic categories in the constitution, or in the census, which is lower level expression, or in ID cards? Is there ethnic territorial autonomy, a territory given to different ethnic groups? Are there multiple official languages? At the national level, we think there's a lot more, or at least in the regional, municipal, provincial level? And is there ethnic affirmative action? If you have yes to all of these are ideal types, right? It's an ideal, typical multi-ethnic state that has multiple ethnic categories in its constitution, in its census, it has ethnic territorial autonomies or ethnic federalism, multiple official languages, and ethnic quotas, right? Of course, very few countries resemble the ideal types. Germany resembled the first ideal type, and Soviet Union resembled the second ideal type, the multi-ethnic regime. Canada and many other democratic states also resemble the multi-ethnic type. They are not the majority, but they are notable. Belgium will be one. But if it's no to all of these, right, multiple ethnic categories are included in the citizenship, but there are no multiple ethnic categories in the constitution, only one official language at the national level especially, no ethnic territorial autonomy, no ethnic affirmative action, then it's an assimilationist nation state. Historical first would be the French Republic. Assimilationists from where? Algeria, Tunisia, Turkey, Italy, as we'll see to a certain extent, these are assimilationist nation states. The reason I wrote the dissertation and book on this is because the ethnic-civic distinction, to me, is nonsensical. Because it lumps together countries like India, Canada, Belgium, together with France as civic nation states. But there is a world of difference between how ethnicity is treated and language and diversity is treated in Canada, Belgium, or India versus France or Turkey or Portugal, right? We can't just lump all of them together as civic nation states. Besides, there's also the linguistic problem. If you are defining one category as ethnic nation, the other categories also have to make reference to ethnicity. Whereas you should call civic, it becomes kind of an empty category. You lump everything else, which is not very useful analytically. So that's, and then beyond the book, we actually went through all 172 countries with the aid of 487 experts. Their names are listed in our website, Regimes of Ethnicity Edutere, at Koç University. So you can actually see the table for every country with a population over 250,000. You can see the Excel sheet. You can see the table because tables are in the book, which will be published in the future. But I brought with me for you the survey results for Italy. What you find out when you do a survey like this is that even if you ask 5 experts on Italian ethnic politics, or Turkish ethnic politics, or German or Russian, you don't get a consensus on most of the issues. That's why any bracket means it is the majority opinion, it's not consensus, right? So for example, large majority said there is no ethnic prior to citizenship. One of them said there is because Italian descendants are privileged. But Italian descendants could be non-ethnic Italians. So when you look at other minorities, majority opinion made sense, so we had to override. Ethnic prior to immigration, no. Ethnic minority status, majority said no, but one of them said there are 12 linguistic minorities, law 482 of 1999, but it's not ethnic minority status, it's kind of linguistic, it's slightly different, so again, majority opinion made sense. I almost always go with the majority opinion unless the minority expert has a much more sound and robust kind of justification. Multiple ethnic categories in the Constitution, no, or census and IDs, only foreigners are listed apparently in the census, but that's not multiple ethnic categories. Ethnic territorial autonomy, we are in one of the alleged ones. There are 5 special regions, Article 116 of the Constitution, but they are apparently not ethnic territorial autonomies. They are regional autonomies, not necessarily with titular ethnic groups which have privileged kind of governance, as in Tatarstan or some kind of titular ethnic republic. So again, the majority opinion made sense. The only category where Italy had yes was multiple official languages, but it was specified that this is only regional. So Italy as a whole has Italian as the official language, so only in Bolzano and Valle d'Aosta, the Slovene municipalities, and one other place. German, Latin, French, and Slovenian in very limited region and municipalities are second official languages, which is yes, so that's why we marked it as yes, but still it's not national, so it's like second level. So when you look at the entire list, it strongly looks like Italy is, and this is the first page of the book, on Italy, and here are the, and we also ask questions on religion. I don't get into that because it's too much. Today's lecture is just on ethnicity, so that's why we have 15 questions also on religion and religious education. But the narrative summary is Italy is almost exactly an assimilationist anti-ethnic regime, except for some regional official languages in the regions of special significance. And this is the map we have preliminarily. Red is monoethnic, blue is anti-ethnic, yellow is multi-ethnic. You only have Belgium yellow in Western Europe and quite a few in Eastern Europe. And the colors in between, you know, when red mixes with yellow, it's orange, so Finland is monoethnic, multi-ethnic, blue, when it mixes with yellow, it's green, anti-ethnic, multi-ethnic, so you see the shades. What is quite remarkable, and I won't talk about this here, is the geographical concentration. There's clearly a geographical pattern from Denmark and Germany and Estonia down to Greece of monoethnic kind of geography. Some of the oldest states, France, England, Portugal, probably the oldest nation states, oldest states that later became nation states, anti-ethnic, and a very strong yellow in the East, which is a Marxist tradition, as you'll see. I'm going to skip questions at this point because we are unfortunately way behind schedule. We'll have question and answer again in the second part, okay? But if you have an urgent question that you don't understand, like any urgent emergency questions? No? Okay. So we'll take questions again. So this is the distribution, and I'll just tell you that it hasn't changed much, right? I looked into the case of Belgium in particular, and it's going to come up again, but Belgium is a rare case where you started out anti-ethnic, francophone, kind of resembling France in 1830, and over 140 years until the final constitutional amendments of 1970, it became basically multi-ethnic. Walloon and Flemish, Dutch and French speaking, fully nationally federal, and so on and so forth. This level of change is very rare. France started out assimilationist 250 years ago, it still is. Turkey started out with the French model in 1920, as we'll see, under Atatürk. It's mostly still with that model. Germany, Denmark, they started out monoethnic. Yes, there's an amendment, we'll talk about Germany, but mostly it's still monoethnic, and Bulgaria and so on and so forth. So it's a case of path dependency. The way you establish the state, it's very difficult to change. And yet I wrote a dissertation and a book about the few cases of change, how it could change, right? That's the second part. A theory of ethnic regime change. How does a country move from one type of ethnic policy to another? It happens very rarely, I want to emphasize that, once in a century or something, but it does happen. The scholarship on ethnicity and nationalism doesn't talk about this much. There is not much focus on this. Most of the focus is violence and votes and genocide and civil war. And the prevailing assumption is that nation states have similar policies on ethnicity, which I disagree because they have at least 3 different types of nation states, monoethnic, multi-ethnic, anti-ethnic. Or even if they differ, their ethnic policies do not change, which I mostly agree, but there are rare cases of change, and change is possible, as we see. My focus is persistence and change in state policies on ethnicity in normal times. So not in times of genocides and state collapse and dissolution, but in times of normal politics, one could say. Brubaker, Anthony Marx, this is not the other Marx, Anthony Marx, Christian Jopke, and some others have worked on similar questions. And most common alternative explanations actually don't work for my cases. Most common alternative explanation, one of them is that there is no change, and I mean, that's antithetical to my research question. Another one is that change only happens if there's state collapse, insurrection, secession. But Germany and Turkey didn't collapse. I mean, Germany's borders changed, but actually the change in ethnicity regime is in the opposite direction. So it's inexplicable with that. And, you know, these are not countries that experienced state collapse that led to ethnic policy change. External imposition, European Union forcing Germany or Turkey to change, that doesn't work. I mean, the times when European Union had the highest leverage on Turkey is not when the changes happened, it's much later. And European community urged Germany to change its citizenship law already in 1970s. And change happened only in 1999, 25 years later. So these explanations don't really fit with the chronology of change. And international norms, there is no one pattern to which all countries are moving towards, right? Some are liberalizing, some are closing up, so there is no one global wave that is making all the countries look like Canada or France or, you know, Soviet Union, etc. So none of these explanations make sense. This is why I came up with the following theory of ethnic regime change based on 3 factors. Counter-elites, new discourse, and hegemony. And the rest of this lecture and the second lecture will be basically exposition of this. These 3 factors are separately necessary and together sufficient for change. So they have to exist, and they have to exist at the same time for a state to change its ethnic policies. The first one is the existence of counter-elites in government. Who are counter-elites? Counter-elites are political representatives of constituencies, people with ethnically specific grievances, right? People unhappy with the ethnic policies in that country, right? It could be, it could be any minority that is opposed to the status quo ethnic policy. There are many examples. So representatives of ethnic groups with grievances have to be in government, but there are many cases I observed that even when their representatives are in government, there is no ethnic policy change. Why? Because the second condition is necessary. This new elite also needs to have a new discourse, new ideology about nationhood, a new way to define Germanness, Turkishness, Russianness, Spanishness, Frenchness, whatever, right? That breaks with the historical tradition, and we'll see examples of it in all 3 cases. So not only that you need, for example, representatives of Soviet or Russian Jews in government, you also need a new ideology about what it means to be Russian and Jew, Russian and German, Russian and Tatar, Russian and whatever, okay? But even these 2 are not sufficient. I saw some cases, and I'll point them out. They are real cases where a new ideology came to power with representatives of minority ethnic linguistic groups in government, and they still couldn't change because they had a very small majority or they didn't have a majority. You need an overwhelming majority, a political hegemony, a landslide victory, which is usually, in the cases that I looked at, 2/3 parliamentary majorities. Why is this important? Because when you try to change ethnic, linguistic, national policies of state, it's so fundamental to the identity of the state that if you have a 51% kind of razor-thin majority in the parliament, your government almost certainly will collapse. Because the resistance will come not just from the parliament, but from the military, from the bureaucracy, from the judiciary, from academics. Because universities, academics, they are conservative in the sense that for centuries they have been recirculating similar ideas of nationhood or community in every country. So a new reformist political group that comes to power never only faces parliamentary or political opposition, it almost always also faces extra parliamentary, extra political opposition from the bureaucracy, the military, the judiciary. The relative weight and significance of these groups change from country to country. In some countries, it's really the bureaucracy. In some countries, it's the military. In some countries, it's a very powerful judiciary that's going to strike down any reform on ethnic policies. But when these 3 stars align, so to say, which happens very rarely, states' policies on ethnicity can and do change. I won't talk about causes of causes. Obviously, there can be other conditions that make it very unlikely, for example, to have a political hegemony in some countries. For example, countries with PR electoral system with no threshold usually have 3, 4, 5 party coalition governments. You are never going to get a political hegemony with such an electoral system, right? If your electoral system routinely produces 5, 6 party coalition governments, good luck. I mean, no fundamental constitutional overhaul is going to happen. In the next lecture, we are going to talk about the change in the citizenship law in Germany, which was in place for 87 years from Imperial Germany in 1913 until 1999, throughout the Weimar, Nazi, post-war, and post-unification periods until it was changed in 1999. Beginning of public broadcasting and elective education in Kurdish, Zaza, Arabic, Circassian, 5 minority languages in Turkey in 2009-2011, after almost 90 years of prohibition on minority languages, and the removal of ethnicity from, bless you, Zdravo and, Gesundheit. It's a bilingual, trilingual region. In Russia. But let me, in these last couple of slides, because we still have time, talk about cases I don't focus on. Because you might suspect, and it's true, that my theory is in great part built on the first case study, in particular Germany, and then extended to Russia and Turkey. But a theory's purchase is usually heightened if it works with other cases beyond the 3 main cases I studied. For example, devolution in United Kingdom, right? That devolved authority to Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. Unfortunately, none of our Scottish colleagues are here with us today, but my impression is that it happened at a time of labor hegemony. Tony Blair came to power, labor had a hegemony which it never had in the post-war period, combined with a new discourse of the new labor and new Britishness, and representatives of these non-English, Scottish, and Irish were in government, in the labor government of Tony Blair. So on the face of it, I didn't write a book or article about it, but on the face of it, it does seem like my 3 conditions did hold in the British devolution. Post-Franco cultural autonomies in Spain, I'm interested whether post-Franco, post-fascist devolution happened in a period of, let's say, socialist or left-wing, governmental change where Catalan, Basque, Galician, and other minorities were more represented than they ever were before, with a new idea of Spanishness. That would be my expectation, and if that is the case, it would actually be a confirmatory of my theory. The case that I know slightly better than these others, apart from, Russia, Turkey, and Germany, of course, is the United States, and it is in your readings. If you look at the article Comparative Politics of Exclusion, where I look at this question, the end of national origin immigration quotas in the United States happened almost at the same time with civil rights legislation that really extended voting rights to African Americans, all in the first half of 1960s. And I looked at it in the Comparative Politics of Exclusion article, and indeed, let's briefly look at it. That's on pages 709 and 710 if you want to look in detail. Were counter-elites in government in the United States? Yes, indeed. As David Scott Fitzgerald and David Cook Martin write in the book that I refer to, the 89th Congress from 1965-66 was the most Catholic, following the first and for decades the only Catholic president, with lots of Eastern Europeans, Jews, and other non-WASPs, right? So the non-WASP, non-white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, had their highest political representation in the Congress, House of Representatives and Senate of 1965. So they were in power, and they had the presidency, okay, so I'll get to this. So they were in government. Did they have a new discourse? Of course, it's 1960s, civil rights movement, plus both liberal and socialistic discourses on identity politics. Here, I mean, it is coincidental, I didn't mean it, but I have it in Malcolm X's bestseller, the autobiography of Malcolm X, right? Malcolm X didn't call himself American, and that's for a reason. In his lecture in Ghana, right, he says, I'm an African. I'm not an American, I'm a victim of America. The idea that you could be African American, Irish American, Italian American, this is a new development. Right? This is a relatively recent development of the 1950s and 60s, before you had to be white Anglo-Saxon Protestant to be the American. Right? That's why a person with some millions of followers and millions of books, Malcolm X could not say, I'm an American, I'm just an African, a victim of America, and that goes with many other hyphenated Catholic, Eastern European, Jewish, Arab identities. But there was a revolutionary new discourse about American identity, combined with new elites in government, combined with hegemony, which happens very rarely in American politics. The same party, Democrats, controlling 2/3 of the Congress, House of Representatives and Senate, and the presidency under Lyndon Johnson. I mean, this has rarely happened. I mean, this is the last time I remember. So all three conditions held, and the United States had historic civil rights and national, also immigration quotas were lifted, so people who aren't from Northwest Europe could also immigrate much more. Okay. Yeah, and in the 5th article, I'm running out of time now, but I'm also coming close to the conclusion. In the 5th article, the most recent one by Volodymyr Kulik, a great Ukrainian scholar and colleague, explains how Ukraine moved from the Soviet-era multi-ethnic regime, which we will talk about in the next lecture, to an anti-ethnic regime. And this is so consequential that, as you see in the title of the article and its main argument, he claims that Ukraine is no longer multi-ethnic in the sense that, many scholars described it for a very long time, because it's state policies that shape also identities, so they can be, and we talked about this yesterday too, Russian-speaking, Hungarian-speaking, Ukrainian-speaking, but ethno-nationally Ukrainian. So this kind of composition, he argues, it's not my argument, but I like the description of the transformation. And it's a rare example, that's also why it's a rare example of such an ethnic regime change after state collapse. But in my cases, there is no dissolve, Federal Republic didn't dissolve, Federal Republic of Germany didn't dissolve, Turkish Republic didn't dissolve, and yet their ethnic policies changed. Ukraine case, or Belarus, or Azerbaijan, Soviet Union collapsed, there are new states, it's easier to adopt new ethnic national policies, that's almost obvious. Despite this though, I should say that legacies of ethnic regimes do persist and matter. That is to say, if, as you saw in this map, right, yellow is very dominant in Eastern Europe, not dominant, but it's most common in Eastern Europe, that because Marxist-Leninism was based on territorialized ethnicity and autonomies, the Stalin solution to the nationalities question, and it went everywhere, communism did, right? Macedonia, Bosnia, Moldova, People's Republic of China, Mao originally, right, they emulated the Soviet model with Xinjiang, Tibet, Inner Mongolia. They never gave genuine autonomy, but the model was there, right? So this is to say that even after the collapse of the Soviet Union, we do see, that legacies having been communist, or having been, if I could show you the world map, which I don't have here because it's not ready, most of the former French colonies, whether it's Algeria or Tunisia, Mauritania or Mali, are anti-ethnic assimilationist regimes. So their constitution and legal, official, institutional structure very much resembles the assimilationist French structure. One official language, republic, and so on and so forth, right? So there are these legacies of who is the former colonizer, Russia, France, England. So these countries do adopt the models of their colonizers. Okay, so we only have 7 slides left, and we do have time for Q&A now. Do you have any questions or comments or anything you want to share with the audience on the typology of 3 ethnic regimes or the theory of ethnic regime change, why some countries adopt multiple official languages when they didn't originally, or anything else? And then we'll move to the third and final part of the lecture. Yes, can you just mention your name?
Yeah, Asya.
Asya, okay.
I wanted to know more about the Algerian regime. Could we consider it anti-ethnic, as you said, or mono-ethnic? And also multi-ethnic,
Berber,
since
yeah.
few years there is also
Yes.
Berber, and French is the second language. So how can we, classify it in?
Yes. Thank you very much, Asya. This is a great question. I did write on Algeria, Pakistan, and Turkey, but in 2015, when Berber wasn't an official language. And when we look at this table, like that we have the table for Italy, Algeria is no. All of them was no when we took the survey in 2014, 2015. So it looked like a copy of the French or Turkish or Portuguese, survey result, fully anti-ethnic. Only 10 days ago, I was in a workshop at Heidelberg. I heard from a French professor and scholar of Algeria that in the years that passed in between, in the last couple of years, 3-4 years, 2019, almost the pandemic era. So I didn't follow Algeria since that, but in 2019 then, Berber is elevated to an official language. So that is an ethnic regime change, right? So that means Algeria moved from, where is it? No category here to yes category, and that's a very big one, right? Because 30% of Algeria at least claims Berber, Kabyle, etc. Descent. So that's a huge population, and if it has official language status, it's a big kind of, it doesn't change the entire ethnicity regime unless it's ethnic territorial autonomy, affirmative action. But even one policy change is a major dagger on, so it makes Algeria hybrid, for example. If it's at the national, is it at the national level or just regional level? Is it in Algiers and Constantine? It's in all of Algeria.
I've been there in February, and everything was written in Arabic, in Berber, and in French.
Okay. For colonial languages, I have to say that French is, a colonial language in that sense. It's difficult to say that retaining that alone counts as multiple official language, because I think almost the absolute majority of African countries have a European language as co-equal official language. But we never counted that as, unless the experts said that colonial language, French or English, is associated with a specific ethnic group in the country, then it doesn't really count as a separate ethnic group's expression of identity. Because the spirit of the survey is to capture whether different ethnic groups' languages are elevated to national language. English or Russian for the post-Soviet sphere, or French, usually don't count as such because they are associated with the former colonizer rather than a specific ethnic group in the country. In some countries where you have large settler populations like French settlers or Russian settlers, it would count as multi-ethnicity because then we say, okay, 30% of the country is Russian and Russian is an official language. For example, if it was in Kazakhstan, then that would, or in, Estonia or Latvia, then we would, but it isn't, for example. Thank you.
What is the difference between, for example, North African countries and France? Because I would, for example, in North Africa, it's so difficult to obtain the citizenship, so most of, Algerians, nationals are ethnically Algerian, while, for example, in France, there are people from everywhere, and you could find Algerians with French nationality and so on. So could we consider Algeria mono-ethnic in that case?
Well, for the reasons that you also mentioned, no, because 30% of the country is ethnically distinct, right? So if Algeria denationalized or gave us some kind of second-level citizenship, like Israel gives to Arabs, a kind of second-class citizenship that it found in, Nazareth or Haifa or elsewhere, then we would say, okay, Algeria officially distinguishes between Arab first-class citizens and Berber second-class. But as long as it doesn't do that, and quite a few countries do. The most egregious example would be apartheid South Africa, where 20% whites were full citizens, 80% non-whites were different categories of second, third, fourth category citizens. Because Algeria has such a large, up to 30% Berber population, which has full citizenship and voting rights, no, it would still be assimilationist. It has an ethnically diverse citizenry, but it tries to assimilate them into Arab culture, which now is changing, it seems, with the introduction of Berber language. Thank you very much, Asya, for this thought-provoking discussion. Yes?
Thank you. My name is Gianluca.
Gianluca.
I was wondering, previously you said that the ethnic-civic dichotomy risks lumping together very diverse countries.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, by using instead this threefold differentiation, we still put together countries like Italy and France, although I find some differences between, I mean, Italy still maintains some extensive guarantees, although they're limited territorially. So I was wondering if you still think it's appropriate to put them in the same category. And then I was also thinking that maybe this could be also due to the fact that in Italy there is this categorization which is only based on language, you may say, although language could also be taken as a sort of proxy of ethnicity in some cases. So,
Yes, exactly. That's why we ask for language and ethnicity separately. If they are linked, it's even more indicative of multi-ethnic regime. If it's only one of them, it's slightly indicative. This is the graph from the other article assigned with institutionalization of ethnic cultural diversity in Europe with Eurac Minorities that we co-authored, where we basically visually represented the level of ethnocultural diversity's institutionalization in all 26 European countries. And here you see that Italy is different than France, which is 0, right? So when we have the spectrum, it's easier to see the slight but significant differences, but it doesn't. So in terms of overall regime, it still resembles more France and Portugal, Greece than Belgium. But, you know, these three groups, I think, are still more coherent, you know, like unless you are in the 5 special regions, the expectation is that you are assimilating into Italian language and culture, right? So these are resort spaces, but the overall regime type in, I guess, Rome or Napoli, etc., Milano would still be the assimilationist one. So we try to capture it with the numeric version, but in the end, you know, we need some kind of classification, monoethnic, anti-ethnic, and yeah, so I don't want to keep giving the same question answer over and over again. I hope this answers your question, Gianluca. Gianluca. Okay, any other questions?
Okay, thank you. My name is Rita.
What was your name?
Rita.
Rita, okay.
I'm just curious about ethnic regimes, and you say that it's usually have multiple official languages. And I come from a country where we have over 250 ethnic groups, and we only have one official language.
It's anti-ethnic. Which country is that?
Nigeria.
You have only one official language in Nigeria?
Which is English.
English. But don't you have Hausa, Yoruba, and in the Hausa land, and
Those languages, but they're not official.
but in the regions you have them? In the regions, aren't they official? In Hausa land, Hausa isn't official? Okay.
Okay, in Hausa region, they speak Hausa among themselves, but once you go to the office, it's English.
Okay, okay. Well, I didn't know that. Okay. Well, then it would be anti-ethnic. I don't have the Nigeria survey at the top of my head, but that kind of situation would, of course, be anti-ethnic. If you have so many ethnic groups, so clearly citizenship isn't limited, but you only have one official and regional language, then it's fully anti-ethnic. That's like many assimilationist countries. You have ethnically diverse citizenry, but a single official language, that's anti-ethnic. Yeah. Whereas, for example, South Africa, I do remember it because it was one of the countries in focus, as something like 15 official languages, clearly multi-ethnic, right? India, 22 official languages and territories, clearly multi-ethnic. But if you have diversity, but single language, unitary state, no ethnic territorial autonomy, no identification at the individual level, then it's assimilationist anti-ethnic. Thank you very much, Rita. Okay, then let's move on to the final. I mean, you are the boss, so we have 22 minutes, Andrea. We could continue. Yes, ask. Okay.
I mean, some states, they might treat some ethnic groups or linguistic groups, we speak about it in a different way compared to others. I mean, there's the treatment of the groups that is different. So I'm trying to figure out, you put the parentheses, which I understand, because some answers are not clear. So affirmative action in Italy, we actually have affirmative action here in the South.
At the regional
So,
level.
why do you put the answer is no affirmative action in Italy? Because based on what you make the decision, because there's no homogeneous treatment of the different groups of minority in country, but you made the decision, okay, this is now rather than yes. How you made the decision?
Okay, let's look at the chapter. Again, it's 172 countries. I don't remember automatically, but when we look at this chart, which will be in the book, tells me that I did not override the majority opinion in 13 of the 15 cases. The only ones were, if it has two parentheses, the minority expert was more convincing, the ethnic minority, and is there an establishment national church? Apparently, at least, most experts said Catholic Church, but fewer said no, but I found the no answer more convincing. So normally, because I can't claim expertise on 172 countries, I try to go with the majority of the experts, right? I hide all the expert names here, anonymous. 3 of them actually like to be identified. Their names are in the website, but I still hidden them here. So there are 5 experts, and they work on Italy. Many of them are Italians, so if they have a majority opinion, I try not to interfere with it. So that's my first
So you
point.
blame the expert if I don't agree with them?
No, I don't, because I override some of them, right? Because I need to also write the narrative summary. You don't see the rest of it. So you see the language part, French, German, and Slovenian, which is clear. So for every question, I need to write an explanation why this is the case, and the responsibility, as the book says, is entirely on me, because I don't identify which expert said what either. So it's entirely on me. So I need to make the decision that sounds most convincing for myself and the reader. I don't remember in this case. Why? From what you are telling me, it sounds like if it's just regional and not systematic, right? Do you have, it could be a very long discussion, and we have a South session tomorrow, but is there like guaranteed, seats in the university, bureaucracy, workforce for the minority?
Here in South Europe, yes.
There is, okay. So that's affirmative action.
Distribution of public posts based on ethnic proportion.
And in the other, in Valle d'Aosta and Friuli?
No,
It's only in Bozen. Okay, maybe that might be it. If it was all the special regions from Sicily to Friuli to whatever, it could have been more generic. If it's of the special regions only for the German, Italian speakers in Bolzano, that might have tipped me off in the north direction.
Systematic is the cutting.
Yes, it's the region, right? Looking from Rome over the country, do I see this country more tending towards assimilation? Like, what is the grand strategy of nation builders? Are they trying to cultivate ethnic and linguistic diversity in this country, which Canada, Belgium, Soviet Union clearly did? Or are they really aiming at general assimilation and just created minor exceptions here and there? If it looks like they aim at general assimilation, but there's a minor exception in Bolzano alone, then it's assimilation, right? So I need to look at what affects the average large majority Italian citizen. If it's an assimilationist regime for almost everyone, except for Bolzano and a few regions, then it's more assimilation. But it's not France, as we saw in the ranking here, right? It's close, but it's not France. So, does this matter at all? Why does it matter that, countries that institutionalize ethnic diversity at the highest level, like Belgium, or not at all, which is its neighbor, France? Does it have any consequences for anything other than, writing articles and having summer school courses on it? I think it does. It does have major consequences, and we actually found at least one. There are others, but one that is published that is in your reading list. Ethnic regimes influence non-ethnic outcomes as well. Even though these ethnicity regimes in Europe were designed for old ethno-linguistic diversity, Walloon and Flemish, German and Italian, Catalan and Basque and Castilian, right? They were designed for quote-unquote indigenous autochthonous ethnic groups. Ethnic regimes influence political representation of the largest new religious minority in Europe, Muslims. Muslims have nothing to do with the design of Belgium between Flemish and Walloon, or the design of these other ethnic autonomies. In a study of all the Muslim origin members of parliament in 26 European countries, over 3 electoral cycles, we found that countries with the highest score on multi-ethnic expression, which would be Belgium, so the most multi-ethnic region is Belgium, also had the highest Muslim representation in their parliaments, such as, this is the graph of ethnocultural diversity institutionalization. It ranges from 0 in France and Greece and Portugal to basically 8 out of 10, almost, theoretically highest in Belgium, with Montenegro, Finland, Russia, at least on paper, and North Macedonia really high, and then you have countries around the middle, tending towards, some kind of middle would be, Ireland, Serbia, Spain, United Kingdom, and moving further right, more institutionalization, further left, lower. Theoretically, no, not theoretically. There is no, this is very important for causal identification. There is no historical or political linkage between the design of Belgium as a federation of Walloons and Flemish and Germans and Muslim immigrants. The first one happened a century ago. It deals with Christian heritage ethnic groups and their languages. And yet it affected incoming Muslims, because when we look at Muslim representation, this should be reversed. It's kind of visually, so in this map, the highest is the most highest level of multi-ethnic institutionalization. The second graph is the number of Muslim members of the parliament that are missing. What we mean by this is that if Muslims were proportionately represented in the parliament, Assemblée Nationale, the French national parliament, there would need to be 42, 43 Muslim parliamentarians in the French parliament, around 43. Normally there are 4. Yeah?
Sorry, in comparison with the population?
In comparison with the population, of course.
There's a bigger population of Muslim
Yes.
population in Belgium than in France?
Yeah, it's, but for example, if the population of Muslim in Belgium is 6% and the parliament is 6% Muslim, it's full representation. Yeah, in France, if it was proportionate, it would need to be 8% of the parliament, around 42, but it's 0.8% of the parliament. So it's 1/10 of what it should be. So there are 38 Muslim representatives missing in France, which is by far the largest in any country in the Western world, right? Which is also kind of interesting because France is one of the oldest countries that acquired a Muslim colony, province. Algeria became French in 1830, that's 180 years ago. So French Muslims are extremely well they speak French, they have known French culture and politics for almost 200 years. As people say, Algeria became French before Burgundy and some parts of southwest France, right? And they are French citizens, so it's not a citizenship issue either. Sometimes people raise the citizenship issue. And yet, the underrepresentation is dramatic. 90% of French Muslims do not appear in the parliament. Germany and United Kingdom and Italy are second and third. Italy only had one Muslim origin. And here we are not talking about religious Muslim at all. There aren't religious Muslim representatives in most of the parliaments. So most of the Muslims are nominal Muslims. They have Muslim origin names. They might even be agnostic, but as long as they don't publicly say, I'm atheist, or I converted to a different religion, which happened in the case of several Muslim origin politicians, unless they publicly denounce Islam as a religion, that they don't, then we count those names as, it's like counting ethnic Muslimness, ethnic Jewishness, ethnic Christian heritage. So if we counted religiosity, only United Kingdom would have some. And Italy, one of the Italian Muslim politicians was from the Muslim Student Union, who was a rare case of kind of religious Muslim who made it in parliament, but there was only one. So Italy is also a case of underrepresentation. And in a country like Belgium is the only one in Western Europe you don't have underrepresentation. And in Eastern Europe, right, we have, Netherlands and Belgium. I can't talk about Netherlands unless you have questions later. Bulgaria, Croatia, Romania. Sergey isn't here, but Romania is a case of overrepresentation. You always have a Tatar and a Turk in the Romanian parliament. It's guaranteed seating from Dobruja. Even though the Muslim minority is 0.12%, since you always have a Tatar and a Turk, Muslims are proportionately or even overrepresented in Romania and to a certain extent in some of the other Eastern European countries. So, okay, this was my short Belgium has the highest multi-ethnic representation score in Europe in our survey. Belgium also has the second highest, but according to some measurements, highest. And we are not looking at only one election, right? We are looking at 3 different electoral cycles. And when we look at earlier surveys from 2000s, they still identify Belgium as the only country in Europe where Muslims are proportional to representation. Why? We explain it in the article very briefly. Accommodation of Flemish and Walloon diversity historically had nothing to do with Muslims, but there was a positive spillover effect. The idea that the nation is constituted of different cultural blocks, that there is diversity which needs to be politically represented in different political parties. This, we are hypothesizing, allowed 5 major political parties, it's also not one party, Flemish and Walloon, to nominate and elect Muslim representatives. So this is another pattern. Countries where Muslims are underrepresented are where Muslims are stuck with one party, usually the socialist or left party, that they don't have representation in the center or right. And in Belgium, there are Muslims in the center, right, center, left, far left, in the Walloon and Flemish parties, it's all over. This is the kind of distribution that actually promotes full representation and even over-representation. And even a few Muslims like Mahinur Özdemir was the first in continental Europe. In the United Kingdom, you have quite a few. But in continental Europe, Mahinur Özdemir, Turkish Belgian, was the first woman with a headscarf in all of Europe to be elected to a parliament in Belgium. She later left Belgium and became Algerian ambassador to Algeria from Turkey, and now she's tri-citizen, I guess, Belgian and Turkish citizen. Now she's a minister just very recently, last month, in the new Turkish government, but originally she began her political career in Belgium and became the first woman, Muslim woman with a headscarf in all of continental Europe to be elected to the parliament. And it's significant that this happened in Belgium, but absolutely not surprising for us because we have this graph, right? Okay, so I have 9 minutes. That's, I rushed through. I'll rush through even more. France has the lowest multi-ethnic representation score, 0. It's no.
If you want 10 more extra minutes, I can organize for you a bit more time.
No, let's keep to because the second lecture is even more packed, so let's keep to the schedule. But if there are questions, we could do this. Now, also, consider, these are countries that are next to each other, right? Belgium and France. So they are geographically, culturally, historically so intertwined. One of the dominant languages is French, and yet you have this radical difference which shows the importance of institutions and institutional design. So it has nothing to do with, for example, French culture or anything, right? Belgium also has a French culture quite a bit, right? It has all to do with political institutional design and how you conceive of your nation as a nation of multiple collectivities together forming the nation, or just individuals that assimilate to secular, Republican, French-speaking identity. 2 very radically different views. France has the lowest multi-ethnic representation score. Yes, France has the largest Muslim underrepresentation in Europe, and it might cause many other things, many other problems in French politics and society. I don't get into that. But it's not specific to Muslims either, and we wouldn't expect that. Minorities in general are underrepresented in French politics. We looked in vain with Yuri for a long time to find an assertive Breton MP, right? Brittany has been a part of France over 1,000 years, right? It's an autochthonous Celtic ethno-linguistic minority. You would expect, I don't know, maybe a Breton party, maybe a faction. Nothing. The only person we found who was assertively kind of speaking out for Breton identity was Paul Molac, the first ever Breton autonomous MP elected to the parliament in 2012. That doesn't mean, as we say in the article, that there might be fully assimilated Bretons. We are sure there are, who have been part of mainstream French politics, but French politics, witnesses underrepresentation of people of color, not just Muslims, women, one of the few Western democracies that never had a woman as the chief executive, right? It might. It came close several times, and maybe we don't want that, I mean, in this case, but anyways. So underrepresentation of women, underrepresentation of blacks, underrepresentation of Muslims, and to the extent that we are looking at probably also underrepresentation of Bretons, Occitans, and other non-French minorities. So this is to say that it's the design of the state itself. Of course, there are benefits to assimilationist nation state as well. I'm going to talk about that in the second lecture because every ethnicity regime creates its own disadvantages. For example, I was in Paris by accident, completely by accident for tourism when Sarkozy was about to be elected, and I studied this, right? I look at Sarkozy, Hungarian, Ottoman, Jewish, convert. If this was not an assimilationist nation state, his identities as, formerly Hungarian, formerly Ottoman, Jewish would be very prominent, and it probably would have damaged his election to the presidency. So assimilationism also helps people who want to leave any past ethnic or communal religious identities behind and just be part of the mainstream. So there are many potential benefits for social mobility as well. I'm not discounting that. I try not to take a position on which ethnicity regime is better, but there are clear differences between three different types of nation states, and that was really the gist of the book, the article, and the follow-up work, is that it's not useful to talk about just the nation state. We need to specify which of the three, at least, types of nation states are we talking about. Is it a nation state like Canada, multi-ethnic? Is it a nation state like France or Turkey? Or is it a nation state like Germany, Israel, Estonia, Latvia, right? I mean, is it a nation state of a specific ethnic group, one that tries to assimilate many ethnic groups, or one that tries to actively cultivate multiple languages and culture and autonomies? And my final slide in the last 5 minutes we have, and it is really the final slide, relates directly to the other reading in your assignment, and it's historically the oldest kind of quasi-medieval one. What about the origins? What about the origins of these three ethnicity regimes? If you look at Comparative Politics of Exclusion article I published in 2020, I argue that, for example, Western European geography historically achieved the highest level of religious sectarian homogenization of anywhere in the world. Already in the 13th century under Pope Innocent III in the Fourth Lateran Council in 1215, many people don't know it, that's why it's in my article, all Jews and Muslims across Western Christendom, Catholic Christendom, were required to wear the badge and live in the ghetto. So it wasn't only Jews, it was also Muslims. In Reconquista Spain, in reconquered Sicily, in Lucerne, you have a Muslim colony between 1215 and 1300 in central Italy as well, where all the Sicilian Muslims are deported. So already by 1215, Pope Innocent III and the Fourth Lateran Council declared that any Jew or Muslim living under Catholic rule, from England, where it's applied first actually in England, down to Castile and Aragon and Italy and France, has to wear a distinctive badge and live in a separate, segregated, what we now know as the ghetto. So, and then, as you probably know, there is no Muslim community that survives from medieval period in any part of Western Europe, not in Portugal, not in Spain, not in Sicily, not in Italy, not in southern France, which historically had Muslim communities. So all of them disappeared, and almost all Jews, already with the expulsions of Spain, Portugal, but even before that, England and France disappeared. Why is this important? Because it gave Western Europe a very high level of homogeneity on which to build its national and later ethnic regimes. That's why, and I'm going to link it to the final, third ways, the first paradigmatic nation building, which we can attribute to France and to a lesser extent other Western European nation states, started out anti-ethnic assimilationist. So if you look at our map, I don't know if you want to look at it, the blue is very Western European. Some of the oldest states in Europe are blue. So if the state is founded or existed at the time of the French Revolution, like Portugal, right, existed, it became anti-ethnic. It became the French model. France itself, but also Portugal, also Sweden, also, you know, some other. Where are we? Oh, I have even more slides. Maybe I should have taken the 10 minutes, you are right, but I won't. So this is unpublished work. So there are clear chronological, geographic, and linguistic ideological patterns. If the state is very old, the oldest states, like Portugal or France, that existed as a state, tend to be assimilationist. That was the, think of nationalism as a software being issued. That was the first version of Google Chrome, right? Assimilationist French model. If you are around in 1800, you adopted that. The states that emerged between 1800s to 1922, like German unification, 1871, Italian unification, 1870, most of the Eastern European nation states, they got the monoethnic model because the German Romanticism and the German founding was very much on an ethnic basis, and it spread to Eastern Europe through German language, but also in general because there is a lot of circulation between Germany and these other Eastern European states, and maybe some of you don't know, but almost every Balkan state had a German monarch. The Bulgarian king is German, Greek king is German, Romanian king is German. So when they became independent from the Ottoman Empire, they got, you know, German dynasties. So the German nation-building model spread all across Eastern Europe. That's why we have a long red here from Denmark and Germany down to Greece and Bulgaria. So the date of nation building matters a lot for that. And finally, it's only in the third wave, a 20th century wave, with the Soviet multi-ethnic model, much later in the 60s and 70s, reinforced by liberal multiculturalism, you have states with multiple official languages that put special effort to cultivate ethnic diversity. So the states that are yellow in our map, Montenegro or Macedonia or Bosnia or Russia or Moldova, are all 20th century states, late 20th century states. The only exception is Belgium, and I talked about that a lot. You know, it's a unique case of radical evolution over 140 years, that it started out anti-ethnic but became multi-ethnic, but that's very rare. So, and yesterday I think it was David who mentioned, or maybe, I don't know, Georgios, who mentioned Taras Kouzios' remark, which I agree, that Eastern Europe is seen as more ethnic and ethnically diverse because it didn't have the homogenization West already had in the previous century. I completely agree. I mean, France and England and Spain and Portugal went through their ethno-religious homogenization in 1300s and 1500s. So it was already done by the time Protestant Reformation kicked in. Bulgaria, you know, Ukraine, Russia, and many, Poland, Czechoslovakia, these states that emerged in the 20th century and late 20th century, they still possess a level of ethno-linguistic and even religious diversity that Western nations never had. So that might not be a coincidence that they adopted more multi-ethnic policies. Okay, thank you very much. Maybe I'm not going to exceed my time limit. I was going to say that, again, this goes against much of the scholarship drawing on David Scott Fitzgerald's book, award-winning book, Killing the Masses, where they clearly demonstrate that United States was the first modern state that had explicitly racist citizenship and immigration laws. And most other countries, from Australia to South Africa, from Brazil to Cuba, they looked up to the American example, and they explicitly emulated the American racial laws. Asian Exclusion Act in San Francisco, and then the rest of the United States, passed in 1880s. Again, this is all in my article on comparative politics of exclusion. Leading liberal like John Stuart Mill wrote an op-ed in the New York Times arguing for Asian exclusion. So not only that he remained silent, he actively intervened with an op-ed in the New York Times to make sure that there is Asian exclusion, because he said Asians are incapable of self-government. They don't have, and this was the argument for all non-whites, non-Muslims. So Indian exclusion, Asian exclusion, Muslim Arab exclusion, because non-European, non-white Protestants do not have the capacity for self-government, so they shouldn't be given the right to vote, hence they shouldn't be given citizenship, because they can't govern themselves. So this is a very liberal theory. This liberal theory reinforced mono-ethnic and mono-racial regimes in much of the Western Hemisphere and in much of Western Europe. Winston Churchill intervened in the League of Nations against the Japanese proposal to have an amendment against racism in the League of Nations, right? Said, no, they were openly racist. Theodore Roosevelt, is a quote again in the article, where it says, the white race in the United States, showed its racial selfishness, he depicts it as a positive thing, and kept the non-whites away from immigration. The existence of slavery and very large populations in the American South is a legacy of transoceanic aristocracy, not democracy. So liberal Democrats actually associated at this time, Theodore Roosevelt and all the others that I mentioned, racial purity with liberal democracy, and diversity, multiracial, let alone multi-religious diversity, with some kind of non-democratic, aristocratic imperial rule. So this is completely lost in the current, of course, state of scholarship, but I'm very grateful that they wrote this wonderful award-winning book where I got almost all of these quotes, that for much of the 19th and even early 20th century, liberal democracy as a regime type was used to reinforce racial and ethnic exclusion and to keep ethno-racial religious purity. So it's only in the late 20th century and present day, now we have a liberal multiculturalism, Kimlicka, Canada. This is a very, very recent development, right? This is an extremely recent development. If you read the same John Stuart Mill, who can be more a paragon of liberal philosophy in the last several centuries, like Stuart Mill, they were openly in favor of this. And as many of you know, Woodrow Wilson, the first Democrat elected since the Civil War, was by all accounts the most racist of his era, even for his era. And that's why there was a major movement to remove the name of Woodrow Wilson from Princeton University and many other awards because of his very racist, liberal, democratic point of view when he was the president of not just the United States, but also American Political Science Association. He was a political scientist for 40 years. Thank you very much. So should we take questions and answers? I'm happy to, but the coffee break is also waiting. Do you have any questions and comments?
I guess we do the coffee break and then for Ms. On.
Just super quick, you can repeat the name of the book?
Curing the Masses, Democratic Origins of, Curing the Masses is the big title, and the subtitle is Democratic Origins of Racist Immigration. But it's in the reading list. One-third of my article is just a review of their book, which is a great book. I hope it's translated. It's only in English. I want it to be translated. Any other questions? No? Okay, we can chat over the break and in the next session.
I have a couple of things to say, but we take at the beginning of the next session. Just please assign